Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here. And have you ever wondered what it'd be like to actually be able to live out in real life one of those sleazy romantic novels? Well, if you have, then first of all, shame on you. But second of all, this movie is your chance. The Lost City just hit theaters, a romantic comedy. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So I'll be honest, this is not a movie that I was super anticipating. I was aware about it. They've been promoting this thing like crazy, before other movies and on the internet and, in sports games. And so I was definitely aware of it, but this is not the kind of movie that I necessarily, flocked to the theater, excited to see what they have to offer. I'm just not like a romantic comedy kind of guy. But I thought I had some time. I thought I'd just check this out. I don't know who all would be interested in this movie, but I thought I'd just sort of see what was going on. And I'll admit, if you don't know, if you're kind of new to The Collision, that when I'm not here just kind of blabbering on about movies, I am a novelist. I've published several novels, not sleazy, romantic, trashy novels, but I've written some novels, and my first novel I wrote was called The Lost City Chronicles. So I thought, hey, I am intrigued by kind of getting kind of behind the curtain, looking at stories about storytellers, and so I was a little bit intrigued by this movie. And like I said, if you're not familiar with what this movie is all about, it's just pretty simple, but interesting plot concept. You have Sandra Bullock. She's a novelist. She writes these romantic kind of novels, real popular novels. It's real kind of sleazy, just kind of gross romantic novels that she's writing for all her adoring fans. And her featuring her cover model, Channing Tatum. He's kind of the hunky Fabio kind of cover model, that's in all on all of her covers, and also a character kind of in the story. The fictional versions of them go on all these kind of adventures and get up to the craziness that they get up to. Well, one of her most recent novel seems to stumble across some real life archaeological stuff that a kind of delightfully villainous Mr. Harry Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe, playing the villain in this movie, that he's intrigued. He thinks that she might have the missing piece because of what she wrote in this novel. So he kidnaps her, brings her to this island, the Lost City, to find the treasure, like in her novel, causing Channing Tatum and also a pretty funny Brad Pitt character to go off and rescue her, and essentially they end up living out kind of in the flesh, in real life, living out this romantic kind of comedy that she has been writing about. So the actual premise of this movie is quite I don't know if it's necessarily wholly original. There's been kind of similar stuff like this, but the idea of these kind of real life, the author and the cover model having to go on an adventure, in real life, is kind of intriguing. And the movie starts off kind of fun, and I was like, hey, maybe I'll like this movie more than I thought I would. The opening scene, which you've seen in all the trailers and stuff, about kind of her deleting things and interacting with her characters, it starts off well. But unfortunately, it just can't keep the momentum going. This movie is it's meh. I didn't necessarily just like hate this movie like I maybe thought I might hate it. But I don't necessarily know if I enjoyed this movie, or if I enjoyed it enough to to recommend it to other people. And I think there's several issues with this movie that, at least to me, and one of them is just that this movie is not as clever as as I think it could have been. I think that the whole premise of her going and living out one of her novels, there's tons of stuff to do with that. And even just like the whole genre of these like trashy romance novels, like that is just a fertile soil just for a ton of jokes. You can poke fun with so much stuff about, this kind of hunky cover model. And, there's tons of stuff that they could have done with this, and they just don't really do a whole lot with it. Kind of that interesting opening where she's it's like in her head and she's like in her story and like interacting with characters. And it's sort of a neat kind of framework to kind of get inside of what she's thinking and who she is. But after that opening scene, they never do that again. You never really kind of get in her head. And even the connections between the fact that she's like I'm not a real, romantic, lover, adventurer, but I just, play one in my novels. Although that's the foundation of the movie, the story itself never kind of draws the connections between, she doesn't seem like she's super idealistic about romance novels anyways. And she keeps kind of having to, one of the ongoing gags in this movie is to remind Channing Tatum's character that, you're not Dash, which is the name of his cover model persona. But the problem is he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't seem like he thinks he's Dash. Like, he doesn't do stuff that, he's not like in some fantasy world. He actually seems to have a fairly good grip on the fact that he's more than just a cover model, and that, that's some of the kind of more touching emotional scenes in this movie are based on the fact that like he knows that he's more than that. And like, so the film just doesn't really play around as much as it could have with kind of drawing connections and kind of speaking on some of these genres and some of the like, just the contrast of this guy that thinks he's this awesome, hunky cover model adventurer, but he's really not, because the characters kind of know, like they're not fooled by their fiction. So some of that kind of reality versus fiction doesn't play out as clever as I think it could, and even just some of like the techniques like going inside of our head, which was interesting at the start. Just they don't really do anything clever like that in the way that they tell the story. It's pretty just sort of paint by numbers once they get going with this. And the other maybe issue, or at least talking point, is the humor in this movie. And I think comedies are maybe one of the most tricky genres of any kind of movie to review, because comedy is largely subjective. What makes one person kind of belly laugh makes someone else just sort of groan. So it is hard to say, I don't want to be the be all and end all judge of whether this was a funny movie or not. You might find this a very funny movie. To me, it just wasn't a very funny movie. Or at least not like a laugh out loud belly laugh. Like, this is a crazy movie. I gotta bring my friends and see this scene again. Like the theater I went and saw this movie at a kind of a weird time in the day. So there wasn't a ton of people in my theaters, but like once the lights went down, like I wouldn't have known anyone else was in the theater. Like there's no like laughing out loud in the theater. Like, it's more a movie where there's, they kind of say a few things. And maybe there are some funny lines. There's at least one line that I thought was quite hilarious, that did kind of make me chuckle to myself. But this is more a movie where you just sort of sit back and you're not going to laugh out loud. You're not going to, want to watch it with friends. You just sort of like, oh, that's kind of a funny situation. And I think a lot of the humor too, it's not even, they don't really set up these like crazy, kind of throw their characters into these crazy situations and like kind of situational humor. It's all the humor that they try and kind of pull out of this movie comes from like the banter between the characters. And some of it is, like I said, there is some funny like one-liners where they say some stuff that is funny, but for the most part, it feels very scripted. Like it's something happens and she says a line, he says a line, and they kind of go back and forth and kind of try and like, you can just tell that like, they're trying really hard to make this funny. And it kind of reminded me almost of like the standard like MCU, like the Marvel movies, like where they always have those like kind of quips, those one-liners. It's kind of like if you take one of those, but then you extend it for like 60 seconds of going back and forth. And it's just, I didn't find it overly funny. And I think as a comedy movie where, no one in the theater laughs out loud, I think that is an issue, especially if there's not a whole lot of like other kind of clever or entertaining stuff going on. So at least for me, the humor in this movie just did not hit. That's not to say it's entirely not enjoyable. There are some good moments, and Brad Pitt's character is pretty funny. Like, so there are some moments that are good, but again, there's a lot of stuff that's just sort of, they're just going from place A to place B, and they're kind of talking to each other, but not a whole lot happening. So I think kind of both those not being a very clever script, and then the humor just not really landing, just kind of results in this movie just sort of being kind of a forgettable meh, like mildly entertaining, but definitely not anything that anyone's going to kind of remember long term or want to watch again. As far as the content kind of on the surfaces of this movie, as far as the profanity goes, as I kind of looked, I did some research. Apparently there was an F-bomb in this movie. I didn't hear it in the theater, so I don't know for sure, but apparently there might be one, so don't blame me if I say there isn't one and you hear one. But other than that, this isn't a movie this is like filled with profanity by any means. It does have it's kind of a fair amount of sort of more minor profanities that are used kind of throughout, but nothing like way over the top in that way. There are, which we'll get to when we get to the sexuality stuff. There are a lot of kind of innuendos and stuff, which it's kind of crude talk, but not a whole lot of profanity. And even there's a lot of the profanity kind of moments. They do a lot of like the placeholder, like kind of like what church kids often do, like where like one of the ones the Sandra Bullock's character says a lot is like cheese and rice, which is obviously like a play off of using the Lord's name in vain, and she uses that all the time. So it's not a profanity, but it's kind of a profanity. So there's stuff like that. Sexuality, this is based on a woman that writes really sleazy kind of novels, is filled with tons of sex and stuff. So there is moments where they talk about the novels and talk about sex. And like I said, there is a ton of innuendos and not overly subtle innuendos, where they're making a lot of like sexual jokes. As far as like skin and stuff, her character wears like a low cut dress for a lot of it. If you've seen the poster, you kind of know the outfit. I didn't find it like super gratuitous. And then Channing Tatum, he spends a lot of this movie shirtless because when you have a six pack like that, I guess you want to show it off. So he does that. And there is the moment that they kind of keep hyping up in the trailers where he like strips down butt naked, and she has to like pick leeches off of his backside, and you see it. You see zoomed in full Dolby Cinema screen size of Channing Tatum's rear end. So there is that, and they do some of the sexuality, like the talk and stuff. It just goes kind of over the top. Like, he turns around and she's just basically staring at his genitalia and kind of drags on. What they're trying to make is like a funny comment, and it's just not funny. So it does have some sexuality and stuff in it, even if there's not like necessarily, other than Channing Tatum's backside. There's no like nudity or sex in this movie, but that topic is kind of sprinkled all throughout. And violence is not a violent movie, except there is one moment that's kind of intentionally kind of shockingly violent, where a character gets shot, gets killed, and his blood splatters onto the other characters. You don't like see the guy or the person that gets shot, but you see kind of the aftermath of that, and they play it up as like a big shocking kind of moment, and they kind of play it up kind of as like a humorous thing, so the characters for a while in this movie, they're covered in that person's blood, and the character's talking about that he has that guy's like blood on his face, and like asking things like, is it his brains? Like, so they do talk about it, and some people might find it kind of gratuitous. It results in one of the best lines in the movie, so there is some fun with it. They don't play it up in a real gross way, but definitely, other than that, there's not like violence, kind of gratuitous at least. As far as the sort of themes, the kind of things beneath the surface, not necessarily a whole lot in this one to kind of wrestle with as a Christian, or to kind of unpack like worldview wise. But there's a couple of themes that did kind of stand out to me. One, which seems fitting for a story like this, is just the idea: don't judge a book by its cover. The film tells you that. One of the lines is the character telling the other character, "Don't judge a book by its cover, and you should know this. You're a novelist." And it kind of looks into that a little bit, kind of in both characters. Again, that's not necessarily just like a Christian theme. That's sort of a universal kind of theme or saying, or golden rule kind of thing. But again, it is consistent with the Bible, with John and chapter 7 and James chapter 2 and Samuel. There's other verses that kind of get into don't judge by appearances. God looks at the heart. Some of that stuff, and you kind of see that with both of the characters. On the one hand, like the Tatum character, he's like this like hunky kind of Fabio cover model, and there's perceptions that he's a sort of an idiot, and that he's this sort of very vain, and he's all he is just his looks, and kind of throughout the story you realize that no, like he has a family, he has a life, even what led him to be his career was not necessarily what he always envisioned, but he found meaning in it, and so it kind of looks at that. And then also just the Sandra Bullock's character, that she's sort of has this persona as this like kind of love guru, and she writes all these romantic novels, and she dresses in real kind of out there outfits, and she's on stage. But kind of the reality is that her character in the story is she's grieving from the loss of her husband. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago in the story where she lost him, and like her heart's just not into this story, and she's just sort of doing it because her publicist is making her do it. And so you kind of see it with both characters. Is looking at like, hey, people. We all kind of play a part, kind of this outward mask that we have, but beneath the surface, people are a lot more than just what we see. So I think, hey, it's a good message to have, and the film does kind of bring that out in some, I think, maybe meaningful ways. Maybe the other kind of theme that stood out, maybe kind of related to that, but just kind of the relation between like fiction and reality. And as a storyteller and just someone that loves movies and stuff, this is this kind of theme that I latch on to, but just sort of showing that there is a balance, that that stories and like these like fictions and entertainment and like especially like this kind of genre of like these like romance novels and stuff, that they can just be this like unhealthy escape from reality, and you can kind of go hide in there and not have to deal with as a novelist you can do that, and this indulge in all these like romantic stories and like not have to like examine and deal with the own grief and like romance and heartbreak in her own life. But it also the movie kind of gives a balanced perspective of that, of like, hey, but but stories do matter. That we do relate to stories. These stories aren't reality, but they're part of our story, and we can kind of see ourselves kind of in these characters. And so again, I thought not necessarily like a biblical theme. I think you could probably make some connections, but just an interesting kind of look on just sort of the relationship that we have with these like stories and movies and stuff. That hey, they are meaningful if kind of kept in the right place, but they also can become this sort of they can allow us to escape and kind of live out a persona that's not real. So I don't know. Maybe you guys will find some stuff to kind of think about with that. Which again, for a movie that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot kind of message to say, those are at least two things that stood out to me. So in the end, I don't know. This movie was fine. I didn't hate it. I'm not going to watch it again. I think some of the sexuality and stuff is just kind of unnecessary. But as far as like comedies go, at least these days, this is like a PG-13 comedy, so this isn't like a super raunchy comedy. Like, it seems like all comedies these days just have to be super raunchy. So maybe for viewers that want kind of just kind of a mildly amusing comedy without all the filth that you normally get with that, maybe this is a movie for you. Maybe you'll enjoy some of the story. All the characters and stuff are charming, and they all do well. It's just that the story itself just doesn't kind of do enough, I guess, to keep, at least for me, to keep me captivated, or doesn't set the jokes up enough to make it kind of a memorable time of laughter. But if you guys do see this movie, if you're just into romance stories and you want to check it out, so let me know your thoughts. I'd love to have a conversation with you guys in the comment section and just sort of talk about movies. So I like doing that. I want to encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. We got a lot of stuff going on here at The Collision. A lot of other movie reviews for movies that I think I enjoyed more. The Batman, Turning Red, all these kind of movies, that Uncharted, kind of recent movies, and we'll be doing all the big movies this summer. So join us, have a conversation about movies, pop culture, kind of digging into the stuff beneath the surface with some of the themes and worldview stuff like we like to do here at The Collision. Love to have you join those conversations. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.